Senator Raumesh Akbari is joining me tonight to talk about what's happening in the legislature and a proposed amendment to the Tennessee Constitution that you will have the chance to vote on this November. And of course, I think we can all agree that voting is important. So let's get to know the issues. Senator Akbari, thank you again for being here. We are coming up on the half hour. I know some people will be just joining us for the first time, so I want to dive back into this. Amendment 3 that people will see on their ballot, because this is a governor's race, is a chance for you to vote to change some wording in the Constitution.
Yes.
Take it from there.
All right, I'll take it from there. So it's a really important amendment. It changes the exception within our Constitution for slavery. So you say, well, slavery's been outlawed. What are you talking about? There is an exception for those who are incarcerated. And we saw after the 13th Amendment and this amendment was ratified in Tennessee that, you know, those who had been enslaved were essentially re-enslaved through the prison system. What this is going to do is take that exception out. So it says, look, if you're incarcerated, there's no way that you can ever be a slave or an indentured servant. You can work, but you will have to be paid to work. And so this amendment will kind of reflect our moral values, our values as a state. It will enshrine it in our Constitution. I think that's really important in 2022 for us to be able to say that.
Yeah, and you told me that this isn't a problem right now in our state, which I think is important to be transparent about. Like, we're not trying to push back against something that is happening. But at the same time, as we were talking in the commercial break, it seems like in many facets of life right now, we're saying, I didn't think that was ever going to happen, and here we are.
Yeah, that's true. So it's not a current issue, but we want to make sure that never is an issue, that this never happens again. It's reflected in our Constitution, our governing document for our state. You never know what happens, and we want to make sure that there's no confusion that that could ever happen again in our state.
Not many topics in politics get agreed upon these days, but this, as it's had to pass through 2 different sessions, because that's what has to happen for an amendment to be on the ballot, it really has passed with flying colors.
Yeah, it really has. I mean, you see a lot of opposition to a lot of things, but this one is universal. There's a bipartisan committee where you have Republicans and Democrats on it now to help push this initiative across the state. It is something that I think red, you know, blue, purple, whatever, you can agree on.
Yeah, to raise your hand and say, no, I mean, you have some explaining to do, right?
Seriously.
Yeah. Again, you will be able to go to the polls, vote on this. November 8th is our next election. You even mentioned it, Senator, that, gosh, some people really have election fatigue. This will be our 3rd election this year in some areas where folks can go out and vote. Yeah,
it's a lot. So make sure this is important. You need to vote for your governor, and you need to vote for these amendments. If you do not vote for any choice for governor, if you skip that, then your vote on the amendments will not count. So make sure you do both. And, you know, we can't get tired now. This is an important ballot. You have our federally elected officials. You have our governor. That only happens every 4 years. And, of course, these 4 constitutional amendments. That's a big deal.
It is. And you touched on something that if you weren't with us earlier, because we really did explain this, if you don't vote in the governor's race, it doesn't matter if you fill in those bubbles for these amendments. It will not count.
It will not count, because they take the majority of those who voted, they split it in half, and once you get 50+1, then that amendment will pass or fail based on that.
So you got to get out there and do it. You know, it's these little things that, I mean, I didn't know that before. Like, you really...
Yeah, it's more complicated than people think. You know, there are a lot more rules than you think.
And for a purpose. This isn't just to make it difficult to make it difficult. There's reasoning behind this. There's reasoning that this had to go through 2 different sessions.
You want to make sure the Constitution is sacred. It's important. It's something that we all say, well, you know, that's unconstitutional or that's constitutional. So you don't want it to be frivolously amended. And so we always say it will take an act of God to undo a constitutional amendment, and it is very difficult to get one through the process as well.
Are you hopeful?
I am. I think because you saw such strong support in the General Assembly, you're seeing this, you know, hodgepodge of bipartisan elected officials and community leaders supporting this. I am very hopeful.
You're here as a Democrat helping to spread the word. Do you expect the same from your Republican colleagues when it comes to this?
I do. I really do. I know that some of them have already donated to the cause. They're certainly on board and on the advisory committee. So I think so, yes.
And it is important that when people are going out and asking for votes, that they are explaining all of these amendments, because this one is pretty clear. Some of the others are not.
Not at all. Some of them say certain things would mean something else. And so it's hard being a voter, but the more informed you are, I think the better it is, and the easier the process will be for you in the booth.
A little nervous come November, or you're like, no, we're good.
We're good. I think we're good. We'll see. Never say never.
Isn't that the truth? Never say never. All right, you've been doing this in the state legislature in one form or fashion since 2013. The next session convenes in January of 23, which sounds like a long time away, but it's not.
Right.
What do you have your eye on for that session?
Well, certainly I think it'll be a new General Assembly. So you'll have the governor in his second term. We'll kind of see what he's interested in. I know that criminal justice reform has been a big thing that we've been able to agree on. So I'm hoping he'll continue to push that, especially juvenile justice reform. I'm on a task force that actually meets tomorrow where it's talking about how our juveniles are being treated at our different facilities, and is this a good thing? Are the facilities adequate? So I think that'll be addressed. I certainly think that we'll continue to look at ways to improve literacy. That always comes up as an issue. We did do the big nugget with education funding last year, but we'll see what that looks like as far as teacher raises and trying to make sure we retain our teachers. And of course, you have some political things. Like I know that there's been some mention about something with Nashville related to the RNC. Hopefully that's just talk and it won't result in anything negative, because at the end of the day, we're all one state.
Right.
But I think it's going to be a new ballgame. You have a lot of new elected officials that will be in the House, and in the Senate not so much, because only a few of us retired. But we'll see. I mean, I think that it's going to be interesting.
Of course, there's been a political spotlight on what's happening on Capitol Hill right now. As you said, there is some turnover. So that really does change the personality of what's happening up there, the push. I mean, maybe people don't really understand like the inside workings, but it does take a lot of handshaking, good conversations, going across the aisle, especially when you're a Democrat, to say, can we get behind this, right?
Oh, yeah. When you're a Democrat, you're in the super minority. Which we could stay home and legislation could still pass.
Yes.
So it's always about finding middle ground, trying to, I don't agree with you on 90 things, but the 10 things I agree with you on, let's work on that. Let's make that happen. Let's try and kind of fix that for our state, because we have the same goals. Again, we want our people to be able to live in communities that are safe. Their kids can go to good schools. They can work a job and be able to pay their bills. We just have different ideas of how to get there. So we kind of have to give and take on that.
What keeps you going?
Ooh, I don't know, because it's a lot going back and forth from Memphis to Nashville. But I always think about the people who, like, I have a seat at a table for people. I'm representing certain people. And I have some juvenile justice things I want to do, some things in education I still want to do. And so as long as the people keep electing me, I'm going to keep doing it.
Let's talk a little bit about juvenile justice. We could talk a long time about it. It's been a big focus of ours here at News Channel 5, spotlighting perhaps what is wrong in the system and the worst parts of it. And it's also a system that is clouded in a lot of mystery for the sake of children, but sometimes that becomes a detriment when it is secret about what is going on. And of course, Phil Williams has been wonderful, and our entire Investigates team about shining a light in that area. We have a new DCS commissioner who is coming in, who has, let's see, we'll be starting, and the system needs reform. Where do you think are the main areas of concern?
Well, I think the issue is, back in the day, those who were abandoned children who needed that type of help, it was separate from those who were within the justice system. So kind of looking at, are we going to keep those the same, or are we going to separate them? I think it is a great thing to have a change in leadership at DCS. There are countless positions that are unfulfilled, which is the thing people are dealing with across the board. But you have children who have been sleeping in office buildings. You have at the Wilder facility, there are children who are running away. And I think we have to kind of look at the system up and down. So that's part of what our task force is doing. We're actually going to hear from the new commissioner tomorrow. So it'll be something. But my goal for juveniles is to make sure they do not become an adult offender, because that's how we stop this cycle of people, offending, going to jail. It ruins communities, ruins lives, and it hits across the board. It's not just an urban issue. It's a rural issue. It's not just a black issue. It's a white issue. It's across the state of Tennessee, and I think we have to change something, and it has to happen pretty soon.
It doesn't seem like the system is working great for anybody right now. One thing I learned as we have done this series and talking with Ben Hall, who has really looked at the foster system, and Phil has really looked at the juvenile justice system, that, as you said, those used to be two separate areas. Then they kind of merged under DCS, and there's been some merging in places, areas that maybe there shouldn't be. What do you support? Should these be separated out, two different leaders going their own way?
I really think they need to, because it takes significant resources for both, right? Our foster system is not being run as efficiently as it should. Our juvenile system is, you know, there are plenty of gaps where you need things to be filled in. So if you have two separate sets of leadership, I think it's two very different issues. Yes, it's dealing with juveniles, but you have one thing, a child who's in danger, who's been abandoned, and that's totally different from a child who is, you know, a juvenile offender that we want to make sure does not become an adult offender. So, I mean, we're still doing the research, but I think that it really is a good idea.
Is there a state that has done this well that we can look to as a model?
That's a great question. I think all states are kind of struggling, but that's what we're doing. We are, part of our research is, one, identifying exactly what we're doing here. What are the issues? Like, why are we housing, you know, 15 kids in Texas? What is the purpose of that? Is it because they have special needs that can only be met there? Or is it to get them away from gang activity? Or is it just because we're full? And kind of trying to see what's going on, what's working, what's not, and let's look at some national best practices. So I think that will come.
And so that, you hope, will be a big focus this next session.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And really continue to be, because there have been some changes.
Yeah.
Maybe not all the right changes, or they're not being enforced the way they were planned to.
It's not enough. I know under the Housing Administration, he had a really good plan for juvenile justice reform. You had some judges that pushed back, and the bill kind of got watered down. And I know in my conversations with Governor Lee, that's something that we've been able to really agree on. When he came in, it was criminal justice reform, helping our juveniles, and I think he comes from a sincere place given his experience mentoring. So I'm hoping that we'll kind of continue that conversation in his last term. We'll have some really good things that happen. Yeah.
It really has been interesting that he has really championed this area, which sometimes isn't really a popular area to champion on the Republican side of things. And he continually mentions it because of his relationship with Men of Valor and being in the prison system as a mentor.
Yeah,
he has seen it.
Exactly. And so I think that's helpful. Same thing with his stance around refugees. When you have a lived experience, it really does inform, and it takes politics out of it. And there are plenty of political things we talk about, plenty of political things we don't agree on. But I think that is room to work on and really to collaborate.
Good.
Yep.
Okay, the session starts in January.
Yeah.
Right? How long do these sessions last?
It depends. It's like a toss-up, right? Usually the end of April, beginning of March. My first year in the legislature, it was like the third week in April, so it just depends. So between April and May, sometime in that time. Usually our bills are due to be filed the first week in February. The governor gives his, you know, State of the Union or State of the State address. He releases his budget then. So we'll see. I mean, usually it goes by a lot. It's shorter in an election year, and this will not be an election year. And it's a new General Assembly and a new gubernatorial term, potentially a new governor. It just depends on what happens. But there's time. It takes a little bit more time. So yeah.
Yeah, got to work through the system.
New committees, new committee chairs, all of that.
And you won't know until when?
Right, until January, like until after session begins. Usually by the end of that week, you'll know the committee chairs, your committee assignments, all of that.
Does it like you're the vice chair of the education committee? Does that tend to stick around since you're at a high level in there, or do they say
it depends? So when I first got appointed to education, Lieutenant Governor McNally made me the second vice chair, and I think kind of there's just been a gap where there hasn't been a vice chair, so it's like, are you vice chair, you second vice, or somewhere in the middle? So we'll see, but he pretty much has been consistent with committee assignments, I think.
That way you have the knowledge surrounding the issues and what's been done and what hasn't.
Yeah, and I've been on the education committee since I was in the House in 2014, so it's been a long time. I've seen a lot of things happen.
I'm sure you have.
Yeah,
I'm sure you have.
3 commissioners.
Wow. Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
That's a lot of change, and really a relatively short amount of time for that to happen. Kind of explain some things about the state of education. All right, we're going to take another quick commercial break. When we come back, hopefully some of your questions, and we'll continue this conversation. Stay with us.